first story in this week's tech rumor roundup comes to us from Sony and the fact that they have finally brought 1440p support to the PlayStation 5. So of course, when the PS5 launched almost 2 years ago at this point, it had support for 1080p and 4K gameplay at 120 Hz. So it was an awesome combination of high resolution as well as high refresh rate. But the ability to potentially play at 1440p if you were a gamer with an existing 1440p monitor and you wanted to play at that higher resolution without having to step down to the only supported 1080p, you couldn't on the PlayStation 5. And that extra resolution going from 1080p to 1440, if you don't have your hands on a 4K monitor or 4K TV, is definitely an added benefit. And it also allows games to run at higher refresh rates than they would at 4K. So of course, now we finally get 1440p on the PS5, which opens up the door to a load of different monitors that can finally be supported at full resolution with the PlayStation 5. So I will have a couple linked down below that I've done some reviews on recently that will definitely give you a good experience at 1440p on the PS5. But the one kind of caveat to this release is that variable refresh rate will not be supported at 1440p. You will only get VRR at 1080 and 4K, which isn't the best. Of course, variable refresh rate allows the device, in this case the PS5, and the monitor to kind of work in tandem, trying to say that, the PS5 is outputting 100 FPS in this scene and maybe 144 in this scene. We have to adjust all of the resolutions and the refresh rates of the panel of the monitor to match what's coming out of the PlayStation 5. So that goes away, but you still get 1440p support, and with the majority of titles, you should be able to hit that 120 Hz refresh rate. There's also some other features that came along with this update when it comes to game lists and the game library and such on the PS5, but overall the big takeaway is 1440p on the PlayStation 5. And there's also a lot of big news out there when it comes to next generation hardware that we should hopefully see with the likes of next generation AMD Ryzen CPUs and motherboards, as well as Intel. So we have supposed numbers from PCIe Gen 5 SSDs that are showing almost 10 gigabytes per second, up to 12.4 gigabytes per second on these PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, which is insane. And it's like transferring a game in 5 seconds, probably. If you're doing something like Warzone, it's going to take probably 20 seconds, but even still, 10 gigabytes per second are just insane speeds on an SSD. And that is just kind of where all of hardware is going. It's how can we get things to run faster? And it doesn't just stop with SSDs, but Intel also recently just tested with Broadcom 5 gigabit per second Wi-Fi on Wi-Fi 7. So of course, right now we are on Wi-Fi 6E. That's kind of the peak standard that you can get your hands on right now. And speeds on Wi-Fi 6E are very, very competitive, up to like 1-2 gigabit per second, which is the majority of cases going to peak most residential users' home Wi-Fi, maximum rate. But if you do have something like 5 gigabit per second or even 2.5 gigabit per second in your home or in a business, then being able to download over Wi-Fi on Wi-Fi 7 at 5 gigabit per second is just, it's next level in terms of uploads and downloads over just wireless. You don't have to plug into Ethernet. Even the majority of computers these days, motherboards, only have support for most likely 2.5 gigabit LAN. So if you can throw in an additional 5 gigabit per second Wi-Fi, you're probably better off using Wi-Fi in the majority of situations. Just, it makes things a little bit easier. But that paired with a PCIe Gen 5 SSD could net you some amazing downloads when it comes to game downloads or even uploading to the web. So very exciting stuff coming to the future of both Wi-Fi as well as storage, but most likely at a cost like we saw with the recent DDR5 RAM situation. But it doesn't just stop there for Intel. We also got some news on the Arc A750 and how it is looking compared to the RTX 3060. So these are direct numbers from Intel, so take them with a grain of salt, but generally these look kind of how we would have expected. So the A750 compared directly to the RTX 3060 at 1080p and 1440p, and overall very, very competitive, either beating or just trailing the RTX 3060 in all of these titles. The biggest piece that I took away from this is the pricing. So according to some leaks, it looks like Intel is looking at anything between $299 and $399, and currently the RTX 3060 sits at $329 in terms of pricing. The RX 6600 XT sits at $379. So I would expect Intel to come in on the low end, probably price around $299, maybe $319 or something like that, but undercut both NVIDIA and AMD at this price point. We'll have to see what happens with the next generation of both NVIDIA and AMD and see if they're cutting prices as well for similar performance of an RTX 3060. Most likely, we might get 3060 level performance out of something like a 4050, or I don't know what they're going to call it. But either way, we're probably going to see cheaper prices on next generation hardware from both NVIDIA and AMD. So Intel has to grab some market share by dropping prices. So I'd expect something closer to $299, but we'll just have to see with the release of the A750 in the US and around the world. And the final story, kind of going back to last week, where the EU is bringing up potential antitrust issues with Microsoft's deal for Activision Blizzard. And Sony recently came out with a story that said they are not fully entrusting Microsoft in terms of keeping the deal going to allow Call of Duty games and just Activision Blizzard games in general to be played on the PlayStation 5 for the long term. So, I mean, PlayStation, Sony has been the biggest customer of Activision Blizzard over the last several years, bringing in the majority of their revenue. It looks like 17% of sales was to Sony from Activision Blizzard, Microsoft coming in fourth. But overall, I mean, that is a huge, huge market share of gamers that won't be able to potentially access some of these titles, major titles like Call of Duty, on a PlayStation 5. And is this potentially Microsoft's way of trying to get gamers to transition over from PlayStation to Xbox or even PC? So overall, very interesting read. I would expect that there's going to be some more kind of antitrust or just anti-competition issues that come up with this deal with Microsoft acquiring Activision, but only time will tell if the deal goes through or if it hits a snag like NVIDIA's potential acquisition of ARM, which fell through a few months back. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, get subscribed to the channel, and I'll see you back here next week.